Humbly, I would like to call this Worship in 6 Songs, the worship formula revealed from the perspective of cognitive psychology. It's the most infamously awkward question known to parents. Where do babies come from? Well, let me think. Where do babies come from? My answer probably depends on who's asking the question. I might tell my 7-year-old, well, when a mommy and a daddy love each other. A theologian, on the other hand, might say that God creates human life in his image, and he might discuss how Adam's sin is passed on from one generation to another. When I was in health class, in 9th grade, the answer began with, when a sperm and an egg, and it ended with, so don't do that. On the other hand, a medical doctor presenting a paper on the latest research would speak on an entirely different level. In the same way, if we're talking about the worship experience, our entire vocabulary and description could be very different depending on who's talking. I might describe worship to my child as giving back to God for all he has done. A theologian might look at covenants in Scripture and discuss the nature of the relationship of God and of man. An anthropologist might talk about certain actions that are common to all societies and cultures, and a neuropsychologist might talk in terms of, well, let's find out. Consider this presentation, then, to be a discussion among worship leaders who are exploring the inner workings of the brain. We are looking to unlock the formula for an effective worship experience. We all know when we've had a worship moment or when we have led in a time that really worked, and we've wondered if we can replicate that moment. Well, here are the principles of cognitive psychology that might help point the way. We're going to discover that these concepts transcend culture and style. To some degree, they transcend denominations and even religious differences because they are drawn from universal traits common to all people, regardless of creed or culture. The principles arise from the insights fostered by this book by Daniel Levitin called The World in 6 Songs. Before we jump into the process of creating a worship set in accordance with current understanding of cognitive psychology, I should introduce us to an important ingredient in our brains: oxytocin. Maybe we could call it the Big O. It is a neurochemical hormone that has many positive effects when it's released. It induces labor, it helps lactation, it accompanies sexual arousal, it enhances bonding and maternal behavior, it increases feelings of trust, it reduces fear, it leads to generosity as it raises empathy. In general, the Big O is a major ingredient in the formula of what we know as love. So what causes our brains then to release massive amounts of the Big O? Well, not surprisingly, love songs and other forms of music that focus on the sense of community and relationships will release massive quantities of Big O. Comforting actions, especially repetitious rites and traditions, also excrete oxytocin. We ooze it at the annual Thanksgiving meal as we go through the same traditions, and in the morning routine and the daily prayers, and our children excrete it when they play peekaboo and other repetitive games of bonding and interaction. And most appropriately, the presence of oxytocin seems to be the practical goal and result of what we would consider to be a successful worship service. Bonding and shepherding and trust, which we know as faith, and generosity and empathy and love. Man, those words sound exactly like what every worship leader hopes to engender. So let's break down the formula a bit and see 6 types of songs that Levitin describes, and then we'll apply them to a worship setting. Here we go. Number 1, community. We begin an effective worship set with some sort of a call to worship. Regardless of how formal our church might be or how informally expressive, any group of people who come together feel a collective need to connect as a community. So before they can go anywhere else, they need to collectively recognize their common ground, their shared heritage, and their value. The desire to express friendship and community is best accomplished through, guess what? A common musical language that's shared by everyone or nearly everyone who gathers. Nothing can unite like music. Nothing could divide like music, but that's another matter. Not responsive readings or recited creeds, not shaking hands, not passing the peace of Christ. Nothing strikes at the heart like music does. The right song immediately brings the response of camaraderie with power enough to knock down the walls of Jericho or to make the enemy scatter. So, the right opening song functions like a bugle call or the blowing of a shofar or the sounding of the bell in the church tower. We're drawn together, not even understanding what it is that links us so intricately, but we come because the music calls us to come, and it invites us to gather again as one. The good opening song will stir us to want to be one, even when we are not. In every generation we have sung. What could make a call to worship song even more powerful as a bonding event? Here's the answer. Coordinate that song with movement. Levitin says, rhythm in music provides the input to the human perceptual system that allows for the prediction and synchronization of different individuals' behaviors. In other words, he's saying music provides the perfect vehicle for coordinated movement, what I like to refer to as whole-body sign language. Dance, of course, is what we're talking about. So whether a church chooses to limit that dance to a formal processional of the choir or to a spontaneous dance, there's something special about that combination of rhythm and tones and movement that draws people together. Ever been in a marching band? Most anyone who's been in a choir, especially one that goes on tour, can attest to the magnificent power of bonding that happens when people coordinate their efforts in musical form. Of course, from a purely neurochemical point of view, corporate singing also releases the big O, and thus it helps to establish bonds of trust between people. Levitin says, what we call emotions are nothing more than complex neurochemical states in the brain that motivate us to act. Emotion and motivation are thus intrinsically linked to each other and to our motor centers. Celebration. Once the community has come together in worship and song, an ideal worship set will spend some time in expressive collective joy. A Lord's Day assembly, like many human gatherings, is a time for praise and thanks and celebration. Perhaps as recently as a generation ago, many churches did not consider any emotion other than reverence to be appropriate for what they considered to be a solemn assembly. But there are only few churches today that do not make a celebratory atmosphere a high priority. Indeed, contemporary American culture in general leans away from formality of the past, compared to just a generation or two ago. If you've experienced enough of life, you know that weddings, inaugurations, graduations, and even funerals were once considered occasions for reverence and austere rituals. But today, there's a strong tendency toward turning them all into opportunities for expressive celebration. As in other settings, so in contemporary worship gatherings on Sundays, we sing and dance. Music in worship can convey joy at a level that eludes us when we try using words alone. So in every generation, we sing, and so we gather, and as we do so, we move from a sort of self-conscious invitation and into the celebration itself. Could we feel that joy of experience and that level of celebration without music and even without movement? This is the time in an effective worship celebration and expressive exuberance. The word enthused comes from a Greek word meaning infused with God. To know God is to be enthused. And so as we express ourselves, there are benefits. Levitin asserts that participation in music can alter brain chemistry associated with well-being, stress reduction, and immune system fortitude. However, he clarifies, only music deemed as pleasant brings an instant increase in levels of serotonin. That's another happy hormone. Now, keep in mind that the concept of what is deemed pleasant is culturally determined. No cultural studies have found any objective measurement for what is going to work by releasing serotonin and the big O in everyone's brain. So the choice of genre, melody, and tempo are crucial for eliciting the power effect in a congregation. But what works for one people group might not work for another. Well, what's more, music tends to activate our motor senses and our sympathetic nervous system. It comes out in clapping hands, tapping feet, and dance. Levitin says, through these movements, we burn off excess energy that could otherwise be toxic. The energy can also be channeled into increased mental activity, clearer insights, deeper prayer, improved meditation.